Have you ever been to Hortons? Although it is quite well known here, in the rest of the world, there are very few franchises. And in fact, no one talks about them as much as you might think. I'm a big Hortons fan. There is nothing nicer than the smell of good coffee in the morning. But as you can imagine, this is not a story about how much I love coffee. This is a story of the worst day of my life, and yet I am thankful for it, because by a miracle, it was not the last. It all started when I turned 18. Right out of high school, I needed a part-time job to pay for college, and Hortons was my first choice. The people at the cafeteria already knew me. I was always going with my father, and I lived a few blocks away, so they hired me almost without hesitation. My first few months were very good. Everyone told me I was too dedicated for a simple coffee shop, but what was wrong with that? I enjoyed it. Everything was going great until one Tuesday in winter. I remember it was a cold, rainy morning. Our place was a bit small, so there were very few people attending it, especially in the morning. We had no security personnel, but we could call the police if something happened. But the place was very quiet, generally. That Tuesday, it was very quiet. There were very few people in the place. One man stood out among them. He was very tall and muscular, but for some reason, he looked absolutely terrified. He was looking everywhere without stopping, and he was already on his third cup of coffee. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, but I didn't want to be too intrusive. Anyway, the answer came on its own. Some men entered the place. Two of them were in suits and were very tall, even taller than the one sitting at the table. Behind them was another man with a cigar, much fatter and shorter than the rest. But nevertheless, he was the most terrifying of them all. The other men looked quiet, but the shortest one, who looked like the boss, had all the appearance of a mobster. As soon as they walked in, I was cleaning up near them and said hello. But not only did they ignore me, but I could see how the boss made a face at one of them in the suit, mocking me, and he chuckled under his breath. The men walked straight over to where the muscular man sat, and as one of the men in the suit grabbed him by the shirt, the boss said something I couldn't hear. In response to this, the muscular man started to cry, but the only thing he managed to do was to get the boss to throw the boiling coffee in his face. The man fell to the floor and began to scream, and the few customers that were there began to leave Hortons. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take any more of this, so with my broomstick, I put myself in the middle of the boss and the victim, threatening them and telling them I would call the police.
Aren't you a bold one?
After saying those words, the man motioned to the men in suits, and the three left. After that, I and other employees called the police and took care of the victim in the back. The man didn't tell us much, but he was clearly terrified. My boss stayed with him in the main office and asked me to go take the trash out back. He would take care of everything. Much calmer, I gathered up the trash and went to the back. What I didn't know was that as soon as I opened the door, there were people waiting for me. The mafia man was in the rain with his two bodyguards, who grabbed my arms and pulled me towards him. I struggled to escape, but when I tried to open the door, it was locked. What?
Come on, kid. Do you think it was a coincidence that I knew you'd be taking out the trash?
Before I knew it, the man had stepped behind me, and with one violent movement, grabbed me by the hair and threw me to the ground.
You see, kid, I could have left. In fact, I was about to leave. But you know what? I remembered something. I don't like boldness.
I tried to crawl away, but one of the men grabbed me by the hair and dragged me into a small garden where we had some plants. I felt helpless. Please, don't be angry with me. I only wanted to defend the poor person. You threw hot coffee on him.
Oh boy, don't cry. I think you misinterpreted the situation. I am not angry with you.
You're not?
Of course not. I don't get mad at anybody. I pay people to do that for me.
The man snapped his fingers, and immediately, the other one of the men stepped on my head in the mud. The ground was wet from the rain, and my head was sinking as the man stepped on it and moved his foot as if he wanted to squeeze a cockroach. My head was sinking deeper and deeper. I could hardly breathe, and I was swallowing a lot of dirt. I could feel a worm walking on my face. Luckily, I got to a part where the dirt was dry, and the man stopped. I stuck my head out quickly to breathe and immediately received a punch in the face from the boss.
Not gonna lie, sometimes I do get a little angry.
Suddenly, the man pulled out a gun and pointed it at my head.
Well, kid, I had fun, but you have to go.
Boss, there's people watching us. This is a kid. Maybe we're crossing the line. Angrily, the boss put the gun away and laughed.
See, I told you guys you should talk a little more. Both of you are actually right. Sorry, kid. I have some anger issues. I'm treating them with a psychologist.
The men walked away from me, walking slowly, almost disinterested.
Hey, kid. Tell your boss I'll expect him for dinner on Friday. Tell him I'll bring him some nice wine.
Confused, I stood in the rain crying, not believing I was alive. The police came for me, and I warned them that the 3 men were escaping. The officers ignored me and told me to drop the subject. That was the last time I visited Horton. Soon after, I moved in with the help of my family. After that, I was terrified for years afraid that this man would come to kill me for no reason. But it never happened. Several years later, I found out that I was incarcerated while doing an interview. I swear that prison had more luxuries than my house. Life is sometimes very unfair, but I am thankful to be alive. I am thankful to smell the coffee every morning and not to have died that terrifying rainy day.
Last night, something extremely weird and scary happened. My friends and I still have no idea how to make sense of it. It was as if we were in a horror story. So, just like every month, me and my buddies, Chris, Noel, Nick, and Asha, were in our regular Tim Hortons for dinner. We all work really tough jobs. I'm a civil engineer, so I'm all the time either on construction sites or in my office. Nick is a writer, so he's either working on his book or brainstorming ideas for his next one. Noel works in a car company, so he's traveling the world making deals and signing contracts. Asha is a professor and had lectures to teach and papers to grade. Still, on every month's second Saturday, we meet at this particular Tim Horton for dinner. We usually share whatever is going on in our life and just chat and chill out. Most of the staff members know us as their regulars, but this time, there was a new waiter there. He was a bit odd. For starters, he wasn't very attentive. Nick had to call him and wave at him a couple of times to get his attention. When he finally arrived at our table for a few minutes, he didn't write down our orders. Then, when he did, Chris had to make sure that all our orders were properly written.
"Seems like this guy's either drunk or high,"
Nick said. We laughed it off. A few minutes later, the waiter brought us our beers, and luckily, the order was correct. Later, we wanted our water to be refilled, and Chris tried to get the waiter's attention, but he looked right over us, and not at us. "Dude, it's difficult to get this guy's attention. What the hell is wrong with him?" Asha said.
"I'm telling you, he's high on something. Otherwise, who would act like that?"
Nick said. Finally, the waiter arrived with water, but spilled some on Nick's lap.
"Hey, what the hell, dude? Be a little careful. I don't want a wet spot on my pants. People might think I peed myself or something,"
Nick said with a serious face, fed up with the waiter. But the rest of us just laughed out loud. The waiter just said sorry and moved ahead. This continues for the rest of our time there. We try to get the waiter's attention and he walks right past our table without so much as acknowledging us. It was all a big joke, and Asha was planning to write a 1-star review to the Tim Hortons. Finally, our food arrived, although the order was perfect. He just placed the wrong food items in front of us. Instead of pointing it out, we just laughed some more and then made sure each of us had their ordered food. Thereafter, instead of giving his order for our beer, we just started telling him to surprise us, and each time he used to get us the same beer we had ordered initially. He was still in a daze, as if there was a fog in his brain instead of actual working brain cells. This was definitely going to be a memorable dinner we would often joke about henceforth. When we were ready to pay, a waitress walked up to our table with our bill and apologized for the tardiness of the waiter earlier. We assured her it was no big deal, and Asha even dropped the idea of writing a negative review. She also told us that the previous waiter had finally taken his much-needed break and was out in the back. Finally, we paid the bill and walked out of the restaurant, still cracking jokes about the waiter and how Nick would have looked if the waiter would have spilled the water in his lap. I had picked up the guys from their homes and was responsible for dropping them off. That's why I only drank 2 beers. However, I'd parked my car in the parking lot behind the Tim Hortons. As we all headed there, still laughing and joking, Asha stops in her tracks and stares to her right, straight at something. Noel was the first one to spot him. "What are you looking at?" Asha asked. "Look there." He points right at the back door of the restaurant we just exited. It's dark out there, only 2 streetlights at the 2 extreme ends of the parking lot. However, there's hardly any light illuminating the back door of the restaurant. So when Asha asked us to look carefully, we all stopped and looked towards the door. That's when we saw it. The most disturbing view of our life. It was weird that people watch disturbing things in a hospital when people die or in movies. And we were all looking at it behind a damn Tim Hortons.
Is it real, or am I dreaming?
Nick asked in an utterly serious tone. "I think it's real," Chris confirmed. "I think so too," I said. That's when it sees, or should I say he, sees us. We're rooted to our spot when our eyes lock, and no one from the group has the strength or the courage to move. Then he moves and takes a step away from the door. That's when our fight-or-flight instincts kick in, and we all started sprinting towards my car. I already had the keys in my hand, and as soon as I reached the car, I unlocked it and got behind the wheel. My friends, too, piled up into the car and slammed the doors shut, locking them. I started the car and began driving, the headlights illuminating the road. I drove the car at full speed as my friends huddled in the back and passenger seat beside me. All the buzz they were feeling from the beer they had drank drained out of them. I was soon on the main street connecting to the highway, going towards my home. For several minutes, none of us said a word. We were all shocked, and I focused on driving. "Was it true?" Noel asked, and instead of answering him, we all just nodded. We reached my home and I asked everyone to stay the night, and none of them complained. I live in a big apartment, and I didn't sleep until the wee hours. Today, when I walked out of my room, all my friends were sitting around my coffee table, just staring straight at the TV, which was showing some news. However, when I read the news, the ground beneath my body shook. The news report said that a person's dead body was found in a parking lot behind a Tim Hortons restaurant this morning, the exact Tim Hortons we had dinner at last night. The dead body was missing some vital organs like the heart, the kidneys, and the liver. It was suspected that it was an animal attack, but this restaurant is in the middle of the city, so there's no chance of it being an animal attack, as the largest animals we have are dogs who just bite if they need to, not to eat your selective organs. The news stated that some detectives claimed it was done by a person, but most of the cops had dismissed the theory, claiming who would be so gruesome. The dead person was a waiter who worked at Tim Hortons itself. The poor fellow must have come out of the back door for his break and fallen prey to whatever it was. The whole media, cops, and detectives were baffled by the case. They also say that whoever did this is still roaming the streets. Once the news shifts to another topic, we all look at each other, wondering what to do. Because last night, we saw this poor person being killed. When we stopped in the parking lot and looked at the back door, we had seen a person on all fours eating this dead waiter. We couldn't believe our eyes. When we registered what we were seeing, the man on all fours saw us and then got up. He was standing on his 2 legs now, but his face was red from the blood of the dead man he had just eaten. When we looked a bit more clearly, we noticed that the horrifying-looking man was none other than the weird waiter who had served us tonight. The moment he registered us staring at him, he began running at us, and we ran. and you know how the rest goes from there. We're not sure what to make of it, but we certainly know that the waiter was the one who had killed and eaten his poor colleague. Should we report to the cops, or should we forget last night and move on with our lives? And more importantly, what was this waiter? Was he a demon or an animal?
I do not want to reveal my name or my whereabouts, but I wish to share this story with you, as I believe it's important for people to know it. For the sake of this story, I'm going to use fake names for all the characters, including mine, except one. I still remember the first time I went on a date. I had just turned 20, and my parents were okay with me dating. My friend Sally knew a guy from her dad's workplace she thought would be perfect for me. I had not met this guy before, so it was like a blind date for me. I was excited and fussed about my dress and hair for almost a week before the date. As this was a blind date, instead of me contacting the guy, Sally had informed me that the guy would meet me at Tim Hortons on Saturday. My parents and my brother are very protective of me, so it was decided that my brother would drop me off at the restaurant for the date. Back then there were no cell phones, just some payphones. Before I got out of the car that afternoon, my brother said,
"Hey, if you want me to bring you home anytime, just call home and I'll be there to pick you up in no time."
"Sure, but I don't think that would be necessary, as I plan on enjoying my first date to the fullest." I was messing with my brother, considering how protective he was. A few minutes later, I was sitting in front of a handsome and charming man. He was wearing a brown jacket with a white shirt underneath it, paired with black pants. The moment I saw him, I was puzzled why he would want to go on a date with little old me. He was a few years older than me and extremely good-looking. He could have any woman in the town if he wanted, but he had chosen me. "Is this a blind date for you too?" I asked. He chuckled a bit and said,
"Honestly, no. I had seen you hanging out with Sally a couple of times, and I asked her to fix this date so I could take you out."
That was a surprise that he had specifically wanted to go out with me, but I let it go and decided to get to know that man more. "So, what do you do?"
"I'm working part-time at the wood shop Sally's family owns. What about you?"
"I just graduated and plan on going to college a year later. Till then, I'm just enjoying my break."
That sounds fun. Should we order now?"
"Sure. I'd like a chicken burger and a chocolate milkshake," I said, and he read the menu and ordered a sandwich for himself. We got along pretty well. He was as funny as he was handsome, and I thought about how well my first date was going. I was going to thank Sally after I got home and tell her all about the date. While we were having our food and talking, my date suddenly mentioned a few facts about me that only a handful of close people knew, and I was sure that Sally would not have told him all of it. It seemed like a red flag to me, but I tried convincing myself that it was okay. But as the time passed, I could not shake it off. The fact that he might have followed me or stalked me, all those things seemed very creepy. He noticed my unease and my reluctance to talk as freely as I was talking before, and I was sure he knew what had made me so uncomfortable. Slowly, he too lost interest in our date, and we both ate our food quietly. However, instead of focusing on the food, he was staring at me weirdly. His handsome face had conjured into something sinister. That's when I felt the cold metal against my thigh. At first I thought it was the table, but when the cold metal was dragged against my thigh, I understood what it was. The panic in my eyes were evident.
Don't you dare scream or yell. Do as I say, and nothing bad will happen to anyone.
My date said to me, with a very charming but very fake smile. For a second, I just froze, unable to focus on anything. Just sitting there staring at my plate and contemplating how I got myself in this situation. He kept on dragging the knife against my thighs, the sharp side making contact with my skin. I knew if I even moved an inch, it would pierce my skin. That's when the waitress interrupted us, asking if we needed anything.
No thanks, we are good.
My date replied on our behalf. I knew I had to bail out of this date before it got too far, and that was probably my only chance.
Excuse me, miss. Actually, I wanted to know where the restroom is.
I asked the waitress just as she was about to leave. Maybe she saw the panic in my eyes too, and asked me to walk with her so she could guide me to it. I excused myself to go to the restroom. I knew he wouldn't harm me while someone was present. Instead of going to the restroom, I asked the waitress to take me to the payphone so that I could call my brother.
Hey, George. Could you please come get me? I'm hiding in the women's restroom in the Tim Hortons.
Listening to the terror in my voice, I knew he was on high alert. I could hear him grab his keys on the other end. I quietly waited in the last stall until I heard my brother's voice out of the restroom calling for me. I quietly waited in the last stall till I heard my brother's voice out of the restroom calling for me. I rushed to him and we left the restaurant, and we drove back home. I told him all about the date of mine.
Relax, Audrey. I've got you now. Forget about that date. You're safe.
The next morning around 4 a.m., when my brother was leaving the house for his paper route, he heard some rustling in a bush beside our main door. He did not have a gun, but he quickly grabbed his baseball bat to tackle whatever was in there. Mostly it was usually a raccoon or some rodent. However, this time a grown man stood up behind the bush and started running into the road the opposite direction. That startled my brother, and instead of chasing the man, he ran inside and woke me and our parents up. We all were pretty confused as to what had happened, and everyone was asking my brother questions about the incident. My dad asked him to describe the man, and what he said cracked the floor open beneath my feet.
He was tall, had fair skin, had wavy hair, and wore a brown jacket and black pants.
He had just described my date. I just stood there shocked.
I guess that was my date from yesterday.
Hearing that, my parents and brothers were extremely worried too. Although we did not report the incident as there wasn't much to report anyways, we did keep an eye out for the young man. It was clear by then that he wanted to hurt me, so for the next few days, we made sure that I wouldn't go out alone. 3 years had passed, and I was in a happy relationship with my current boyfriend at the time, Marco, when one evening we were chilling in my home's living room. We saw the news. It was about the murder of a few women, and the serial killer who killed them. The moment I looked at the face of the man on the news, the cup of coffee from my hand dropped to the ground and broke. For a few seconds, I was rendered speechless and just stared at the screen. My brother and father were also watching the news with me and Marco.
George, that's the guy. The guy I went on a date with all those years ago. The one who stalked me.
Good God, I feel so relieved that you decided to walk away from that man.
The news said that he had sexually assaulted a couple of women and killed them. I cried and thanked the heavens for saving me from the predator. According to the news reporter, the killer's name was Ted Bundy.